While George is looking them over because he wants to be able to read the handwriting, I would like to ask you myself, can you give me an example of what would be a race consciousness belief or a collective unconscious belief that's in there that we might not realize is there?
Well, let me give you one that we've sort of done away with, and then I'll give you a more modern one. In the year 1492, or a little before that, virtually everybody believed that the world was flat. The Bible said it was flat. The sun revolved around the earth, and instead of the other way around. And so can you imagine if you were appointed first mate on the Nina? You were going to have the job of going down to the local bar and recruiting people to sail around the world, and they all thought it was flat. Well, they wouldn't go anyplace. Most people in that time they spent their entire life within 5 miles of the place they were born. So we have a totally different world now. That's a race belief that took years to overcome. It didn't, once Columbus made his discovery and the other explorers went, and by the year 16 or 1700, half the people still believed the world was flat. It took years and years for that to change. We have, in fact, there's some wanted now to teach the creation story, to teach the Bible story as science fact, and if that's true, then you're going to have to start believing that the sun revolves around the earth. It's ridiculous. It was a story that was made up for the people of that time, and it was a fine story for that time. And a flat earth was a fine story for that time because if you're only going to go 5 miles, what difference does it make if the world was round? There is, for an example, a belief in war that we have. That's a race-conscious belief. We've been doing war since civilization started. And it is a belief that you've got to fight. You've got to be patriotic. That's a race belief. Patriotism, this is going to be hard, patriotism is the cause of all wars. If there were no patriotism, there'd be no wars. It is a loyalty to a specific group, people, instead of a loyalty to spirit. If there was a loyalty to spirit, there couldn't be any war. If you knew you were one with everyone, you wouldn't fight them. You wouldn't do anything like that. So that's a race belief that we're trying hard, and we've been working on it for thousands of years, and there's been little forays into making it a little bit better. But I really think we're coming to the place where that belief is going to gradually fade. I don't know how fast. I can remember when I was a kid, we didn't think we were going to make it for another year because they were going to blow up the whole world. They had us getting under our desks. What good would that have done with an atomic bomb? But that faded because finally people realized that an all-out atomic war was, I think it was Kennedy who said, would be ashes in the mouth of the victor. And when we realized the connectiveness, the hugest race belief that we hold right now, that's almost universal, although it's moving away, is that you are a separate individual. That is a race belief, that you are separate. I'm out here alone by myself, and there's you, and there's you, and there's you, and we're not connected in any way whatsoever. We're just different people. It's not true. We are each one aspect of the same thing. You are totally unique. There's nobody got your fingerprints. Nobody's got your DNA. Nobody's got the eye shape and pattern that you have in the iris of your eye. And yet, you are part of everything. 99% of our DNA is exactly the same as an orangutan's. Monkey with that for a while. But we're different. You are one of God's ways at looking at life. But so is everybody else. And we come together in conflict. That's an opportunity to resolve the differences that are in us. So certainly the belief in separation, I think, is the most damaging race belief that we have, is the idea that we're separate. Neil Donald Walsh says he doesn't like to watch the news because it's so bad, but every so often he wants to look in to see what the rest of him is doing. And it's true.
Like the war concept that if everyone functioned on the premise of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, it wouldn't be long before everyone was blind and toothless.
That's correct.
First question is, how do you decide if you should be responsible and do something or give up and let Spirit do it?
Well, Spirit can only do to you what it can do through you. Spirit doesn't do things. You do, people do. But Spirit inspires things to be done. You are always, I would ask you to always be responsible. If it's a good thing, to be able to respond appropriate to a good thing, to cheer, to celebrate, to have fun. And if it's a negative thing, to respond in a way that makes it as good as you can at the time. People say, I'm responsible for my behavior. Yeah, sometimes. Are babies responsible for their behavior? No. Is the person who's insane, we call insane, responsible for behavior? Well, we don't say they are responsible. Is a guy who's under so much pressure in a war that he makes a mistake and shoots the wrong person responsible? We say no. So in other words, responsibility is something that the society, it's a race belief, says you are responsible for. And it means you're to blame for it. And you are never to blame. But yet, there's nothing that happened in your life that you don't have to respond to. There's nothing. And there's nothing that happened in your life that someone else created. This is not less responsibility. This is more, far more. You're taking responsibility for everything that happens to you by being responsible to it, by being able to respond to whatever it is in the best way you can at the time. And yes, 10 years from now when you've done a lot of practice, you do better. But so what? You don't ask a baby to run a marathon race. If he crawls across the floor, you give him a hand and say, that's great. And when he's 10 years old, if he runs a half a mile, you think it's wonderful. But eventually he can run marathons. And we're all that same way. So if you take this idea that I'm able to respond to whatever happens, I would say you're always responsible, and I just don't even like the idea of being responsible. I even call it that.
I don't want you to miss the point that your ability to respond to your inspiration from Spirit is the most important responsible you can be. You came out here to do that. Spirit cannot touch, taste, feel, hear, or smell. You came out here to be on this cutting edge, to create, to enjoy the wonders of this world. Spirit can inspire you, but it can't do it for you. So you must relax into Spirit and let it inspire you and be responsible to that inspiration.
If one has come from an abusive childhood, which still impacts their life today, how can one reprogram themselves to no longer let that past sabotage their present?
Well, that's what we do for a living, literally. I mean, that's what we're here for. There isn't anybody in this room or on this planet that didn't have some abuse as a child. Now, might not have been sexual abuse, but something between 30 and 40% of all women have been sexually abused by a person they trusted, not by some stranger stalker, but by a father, by a brother, by a trusted friend. And get this one, 25% of the men, we don't hear about that, have also been sexually abused. And it has a tremendous impact. But it can all be corrected. I remember working with an 82-year-old woman who told me that she was molested by her father. She was 82. She was a child when it happened. And I was the first person she ever told that to. People are walking around with this stuff. You can go through standard psychoanalysis, but I can be honest with you. I think it's a waste of time because you can find out the problem, but there's no solution. Things like Psych-K and NLP and some other disciplines of that nature, energy medicine, are the things that you need to work with. And if some of you are having some very particular things, get with Lauren and I. We'll guide you in the right direction of where you can go. But I would those are the trauma-induced things. Remember the big fat arrow that came down and really, those types of traumas that happened in childhood can stay with you your whole life. And yet they can be knocked out in a relatively short period of time. And they're usually not one trauma. They're usually dozens of them. And you can knock them out one at a time or even in groups. But they can be erased, which allows you to go on with your work. Doesn't make the world fall in your lap. But what it does is it makes you stop blocking yourself. So if you've really been through some heavy trauma in your childhood, whether it was physical or emotional, and emotional can be just as bad, telling a child that he's stupid and screaming at him is the worst thing you can do. And I'm going to make a confession to you here. I did some NLP with my own son. And we came up with an incident when he was 5 years old, and I was the culprit. He'd stolen something off somebody's porch, and I was just livid with him. This is before I knew what I know now, but I was absolutely angry with him, and he was taking a bath, and I took a glass of cold water and threw it on him. Told him, don't ever steal again. It was the worst thing I could have ever done. And when I'm coming up with his traumas, what are blocking him when he's 28 years old, that was one of the ones we came up with. So we all did it. You did it to your kids. Don't blame yourself. Don't get down on for what you did with your kids or what your parents did for you. What is it that...
or what your siblings did.
Or your
My
siblings.
experience is half the abuse came from siblings, not from, or aunts and uncles and grandparents, not just from parents.
What's the name of the minister that owns a flower shop?
Tina.
Tina
Tina
Bartlett.
Reverend Tina Bartlett.
Tina has this,
Joyful Tina.
yeah, she has this expression that she says to people when they come for counseling. Okay, your parents locked you in a glove compartment of your car when you were 2 months old. You're out. Now what? I mean, there is a time to stop it. Now, you can keep playing that tape over and over, and all you're doing is reinforcing it. But if you can't get rid of it with the methods that we're giving you that you can do yourself, do get some capable, competent help, either NLP or if it's real heavy trauma, I use NLP, and if it's the kind of traumas that came in from the repeated things, I generally use Psych-K on those.
Next.
This is a two-part question, and it really does fit right into it. What is Psych-K?
Okay. Psych-K.
Before you start, Suzanne, do you have the pamphlets in case anybody wants one? Could you just have them handy?
Psych-K is a technique that helps change and really thoroughly change beliefs. It's a process. If you were here on the first night, I did something called muscle testing where how many of you are here when we brought a guy up on stage and I just moved my hands up his body and he dropped all his energy right off? Well, Psych-K is, I would call it energy management. And it can eliminate, or I should say neutralize, these beliefs. I always caution people with any of these techniques, if let's say you had a block to playing, you always wanted to play the piano, but your mother wouldn't let you near a piano. She said only sissies play pianos, and just really, really downgraded you on being able to play the piano, but you've always wanted to do it. And every time you try, something comes up, something happens, and you just can't do it. What Psych-K can do is get rid of that original trauma completely. However,
You still won't be able to play the
you
piano.
still won't be able to play the piano. You're going to have to practice. So I always tell people, it's very good. I don't think I have worked more than 4 or 5 times with any one person with Psych-K. That's all it took. And I've had people who came back 2 years later because they found another problem. And remember, it's the dishes. You pull one problem off, the next one's going to come up. But you may be able to handle that one yourself. And if not, then get the help.
Suzanne has some flyers about Psych-K that tells a little more about it. John and I are Psych-K practitioners. Suzanne, sitting 3 rows back, is a Psych-K practitioner. Next week, Julie Steinacher, who is coming, and I know you're going to love hearing what she has to say, is also a Psych-K practitioner. And Reverend Jerry is a Psych-K practitioner. So if you want some done, we're all here available to help you.
Second part of that question is, how late in life can you get results?
Well, 82. I'm talking about ones I've actually had results with. I think the person who's the oldest, I've even had some response from my mother, and she's 94. So it isn't a matter of age. It's a matter of desire to change.
I would say if any of you are planning to make your transition, call us because you really should clear some things before you go. It'll make your trip easier.
Yeah.
Whatever age that may be. Just let us know and we'll come wish you good luck.
When you go through this, what we call transition, and you get on the other side after that first flash of remembering your whole life all at once, the first thing you're going to do is go, I could have had a V8.
Or I could have had a Psych-K.
Or I could have done this and I could have done that. Oh, that would have been so easy if I did that. So why wait?
Are you enjoying this, George?
It's fun. Okay. The next question is the superconscious. How do future information and concepts get there?
How to future information?
Future.
Get into
I love that question. They get in there because there isn't any future. It's all happening at once. I saw an
Would you care to explain that?
I saw a card that said, time is God's way of making, time is God's way so that everything doesn't happen at once. And it's not God's way, it's our way. Everything you know, your whole life, you could actually put it in a moment. It's in this present moment. Yet you remember it in a string of events, a series. And the future is going to be another series which we haven't outpictured yet. But in eternity, most people think eternity is a long time. It's not. Eternity is in the present moment right now. There's no difference in the absolute point right now and eternity. If you want to get to eternity, you must focus on the now, on the present moment. The future is out there. It hasn't happened. The past has already happened, and it doesn't matter because it's gone. What is it that the past is history, the future is a mystery, and the present
Is a present.
The present is a present that you have right now. It's a gift from God. This is the only moment there is. And what you're going to experience and what you call the future depends on what you're thinking about now.
You're creating whatever's going to happen next.
You're creating an experience that if you were not in time-space, you'd experience instantly. But you experience it in a strung-out way. And if you want things to happen faster, you just need to focus more and more on the present moment. By the way, one of our lessons is called the time-space continuum. We're going to talk about all of this and in detail how these dimensions, the three spatial dimensions we know, and time being the fourth dimension, and mind you'll find out is the fifth dimension, and spirit is the sixth dimension. You'll find out how they all work together. It's very hard to think in fourth and fifth dimensional terms when we're stuck in a three-dimensional world. In the movie, I don't think it's in the What the Bleep small movie, but in their big movie, they have a six-hour version of it, if you want to get this. There's a thing that Fred Allen Wolf did, a little cartoon he made about flatlanders, and it's people who live in a two-dimensional world and who are confronted by a three-dimensional person, and they just can't get it. He puts their little flat things that move all around. They don't know about up and down. They only know about right and left and forward and back because they're two-dimensional. And if you can imagine how hard it would be for a two-dimensional person to understand what three dimensions are like, then you know how hard it is for us to think about the fourth and fifth dimensions. But we will talk about that, and I hope I'll give you enough information that you'll have just enough understanding that you'll be able to work with it, because that's what counts.
I dated a two-dimensional person.
Some of you other ladies out there know that guy. Did Jesus have a core beliefs that served as filters to accessing his superconsciousness?
I think probably what he had was less core beliefs than anybody else, so he could make direct access. In studying his actual teachings, and unfortunately what the Bible has, most of what we know about what Jesus said is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's almost nothing that John says that he said. There's a book called The Five Gospels, and in that book, they talk about what Jesus actually said. And in the book of John, there's only one sentence that they claim he said. And that's the same sentence is repeated in all four Gospels, that render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And by reading that book, and it also has another gospel called the Gospel of Thomas. Thomas is not in the Bible, but you have to remember that there were only certain books got in the Bible that were present at the time the Bible was put together. They put in most of the books we have now, including Revelations, in the year 325 in the Conference of Nicaea. And then in 340, they threw Revelations out. Great move, but they put it back in 100 years later. And then there was other books. They had no copies of the Book of Thomas, none. They knew about it. They had little fragments, little pieces. They knew that there was this book called the Book of Thomas, but no complete copies. And they found a copy that was written, that was copied around the year 200 in the Coptic language, which is the language of Egypt. And then they got a full version, and it matched up with the little parts that they had in Greek. And through the way they test things, and if you want to read the book to find out how they do it, it's very accurate. The way they test things, they think that Thomas was written about the year 50. Jesus was crucified in the year 30, 33, something like that. Thomas was written in 50. The next thing that was written, say about 55, were Paul's writings. And then the next thing after that was Mark, about 72, and Matthew, 80 to 85, and then Luke was next around 85 or 90, and then John around the year 100 to 125, depending on which scholar you believe. These were written later and later, and so the story was changing throughout that. There are two Lord's Prayers, one in Matthew and one in Mark. They're different. They have some of the same words, but there's two Lord's Prayers, not just one. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. That's not in the Bible at all. It was in the King James Version because they copied it in, but it's not in any of the original manuscripts. There's lots of stuff you read that's not there. But the book of Thomas is the earliest, was written earlier than anything else, and it has some of the same sayings that you find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. However, it expands on them more, and it really gives you an insight to what Jesus taught. He was teaching something about something called the kingdom of heaven. It was obviously a state of mind. It is what we're teaching here, how to live this in this state of mind, because the only way you could give your shirt to someone who had just stolen your coat is to live in this state of mind. It wouldn't bother you at all. The only way you could turn the other cheek is to live in this state of mind. The only way you could go the extra mile farther than what you were forced to go is living in this state. So all of his parables about the kingdom of heaven are the parables about this state of mind that we're teaching you. Jesus had what I would call a very clear, unobstructed by human thought mind, extremely clear. And that's how he was able to do the things he did.
I have to brag on my husband a little bit. He's a Jesus scholar of about 25 years.
I wouldn't say scholar.
He's done a wonderful 2-CD set called Jesus Christ, Who Are You? If you're really interested in this stuff, there's a lot of great stuff in that tape that will erase some of your childhood core beliefs, or at least allow you to change them to the point that you can live with those concepts and begin to make them work, because there was no greater teacher ever on the planet than Jesus.
We agree with that. And his name wasn't Jesus. No one ever called him Christ. No one ever called him Christ. Christ is an English word. English wasn't invented for another 400 years. Someone might possibly have called him Christos, which is the Greek word translated as Christ, except his disciples were all Jews. They were not Greeks. They might have called him Meshwa, which is Messiah.
Called him Rabbi.
They did call him Rabbi, and because Rabbi was a teacher, and that's what he was, a teacher. The ideas that he was different from you are totally false. What he was more realized than most of us by far. But he had the same basic stuff you have.
And no more realized than we can be.
He said, you shall do the works that I do and greater works. Well, how could you do that if you weren't as good as he was? And you are. And believing you're less is one of the worst beliefs that have been foisted on us. He never said that. And interestingly enough, when he healed people, he never took credit, ever. You read this in the Bible. Every time he heals someone, he says, it is your faith or your belief that healed you. He gives them the credit for doing it. He always says that. And he does not say your faith in God, ever. He just says faith. Faith in itself, this trust, is the key. It isn't somebody out there doing it for you. That what's doing it is in you. And he did say the kingdom of heaven is within. Okay? I got a little carried away, but I think that was a good...
What is a simple way to find out what those negative core beliefs are and then get rid of them?
Okay, well, the best answer to that The question is the last part, getting rid of them. The ways to get rid of them are the ways we've been teaching you so far and the ways we will teach you. The pivoting which you will be taught, the affirmations that you're being taught, the meditations that we're asking you to do, those are all ways to mitigate and relieve those beliefs. For an example, if I'm using either Psych-K or NLP on someone, I don't need to know how you got them. I don't need to know. I just put you through a process and they're taken care of. I want to give you one example of a woman who I did an NLP session with, who was probably in her middle 50s at the time, and I was in a small group. I gave seminars with a dozen or so people. We worked all day in a building, and she said that I can't smell anything, and I haven't been able to smell anything for 50 years. But I can't taste anything, I can't smell anything. Would you do this on me? I said, sure. And we went through it, and during the break, she bought some peanut butter crackers. She tastes, I can taste these now. This is in 15 minutes. And she just couldn't believe it. And I had a little office that was down the hall from where we had the conferences. And she followed me down to the office, and she said, I just can't believe this is really something. I just can't tell you how good this is. And I said, look, lots of women have had that happen to them, because she didn't tell me what the story was. I was just working with it. And I thought it was a molestation, but I didn't know that. And then she realized that's what I was thinking. And she said, oh, no, it wasn't that. She said, I was born in Germany, and when I was 5 years old, I watched my parents being burned alive from a bomb, and I still smelled that smell. And what you did got it out 50 years later.
Now, that lady knew what her trauma was, but the question here was, how do you know what your core belief is? And the only way you know something about what your hidden beliefs are is what's happening in your life. If you are having trouble generating enough money to live, or having to live on a fixed income that is not the way you expected to spend your later years, then somewhere in you there is a core belief that says that was supposed to happen. And as soon as it is gone and you're willing to take a few steps, your income will go up. If you're having a healing challenge, that is your clue that there's a belief in there that you either inherited a disease, or that people who are blonde get this disease, or people who are tall get this disease, or people who are Asian get this disease, or there's something in there. And that once it's gone, then you can take the steps to cure the disease. If you're having trouble in relationships, it is the same thing. The way you know what kind of belief to bring to us that needs to be changed is what is not working in your life is the clue.
How come I keep getting fired over and over and over again? Well, I ask you.
Marrying the same man over and over and over again.
Who's the one person that's always there when you're getting fired? Different boss every time, but it's always you. The problem is in there.
I say the best example in my life of that is one day I realized I was having a terrible confrontation with both my mother-in-law and my daughter-in-law. Now, those two people didn't even know each other. So what was the problem?
The lady in the middle.
Certainly, it had to be the common denominator. And so then I began to work on that, and everything's fine.
I had that brought home really strongly to me with a woman who worked for me when I was first learning these techniques. And she was complaining about her mother, how her mother always was down on her, and she had all these problems with her, but she was always complaining about it. And this was, she'd had some very strict raising and lots of verbal trauma. And we were working on that, and later she said to me, my daughter's got some problems, could you talk with her? So I started to talk with the daughter, and the daughter started to tell me exactly the same thing about her mother that her mother was saying about her mother. I mean, word for word almost. I thought, wow. I thought, boy, I'd love to see the grandmother. Well, we had a party, and she came, and I started to ask her, and her complaints about her daughter were the same as the mother's complaints about her daughter. It was just like, it's just a wave going through. Somebody's got to stop it. And there's only one person in your life who can stop it, and you look at them in the mirror every morning.